Once the sun never set on the British Empire. London was the world's heartbeat. The pound was strong. The empire ruled seas, trade, and mines. But that was then. Now, Britain is on life support. The economy is crumbling, wages are falling, prices are soaring, and faith in the system? Gone. People once proud to call this nation home now line up at food banks, children go to school without breakfast, and in the shadows, something darker is emerging. More and more women forced into prostitution just to survive. Not by choice, but by desperation. When survival means selling your body, what does that say about a nation? This isn't just a decline. It's a disaster in slow motion. A quiet collapse masked by shiny headlines and recycled political promises. This is the dirty truth about the UK's economic collapse. There was a time when the phrase "made in Britain" meant something. When factories roared in Birmingham, when coal dust filled the lungs of miners in Yorkshire, when dock workers in Liverpool hauled the goods of an empire that stretched across the globe. Britain was not just a nation, it was an industrial superpower. The Industrial Revolution began here. Steam engines, spinning jennies, railways, and this island fueled the modern world. Entire cities grew around production. Manchester became known as Cottonopolis. Sheffield was steel. Newcastle ran on coal. The empire was built not just on war and conquest, but on the iron backbone of industrial labor. But it wasn't built for everyone. The wealth concentrated at the top. The colonies exploited workers at home, overworked and underpaid, and the profits used to maintain power, not uplift the people. Then came the wars, the First and the Second World Wars, and with them, devastation. Bombs didn't just fall on cities, they fell on the economy. Infrastructure was ruined. National debt exploded. Britain emerged victorious, yes, but hollow, worn out, no longer the empire it once was. In the post-war years, a different model emerged, the welfare state. The NHS was born. Public housing, free education, social support. For a while, there was hope, a rebuilding. But then, in the 1980s, came a new era. Thatcherism, privatization, deregulation, the gutting of unions, mines closed, factories shut down. Working-class communities were left behind. The North was sacrificed for the financial dreams of the South. London rose, towering banks, a booming stock exchange. Financial services replaced steel, replaced coal, replaced dignity. And while the numbers climbed on Wall Street or Threadneedle Street, the rest of the country sank. Still the facade held. Britain looked rich. London glowed at night. Foreign investment poured in. But beneath the shine was rust. The UK became a services economy, heavily reliant on finance, hospitality, and property. But you can't build a future on coffee shops and stock trades alone. A nation that once made everything now imported nearly all of it. Then came 2008. The 2008 financial crash didn't just shake banks, it shook lives. It began in America, but the tremors hit Britain hard. Lehman Brothers collapsed. RBS almost did. Banks that once seemed invincible suddenly needed saving. And who paid the price? The taxpayer, £137 billion. That's how much the UK spent bailing out banks. Not building homes, not funding hospitals, not raising wages, banks. And while the elite held on to their bonuses, ordinary families lost their jobs, their homes, their pensions. Unemployment soared, debt deepened, confidence evaporated. But instead of asking why the system was broken, the government turned to a different solution: austerity. Austerity wasn't just budget cuts. It was a national wound, inflicted slowly. Libraries shut down, youth centers vanished, school funding slashed, hospitals stretched to breaking. The most vulnerable were asked to tighten their belts while corporations loosened theirs. The working class had already lost their industries. Now they lost their safety nets. Then came the political fallout. Distrust in institutions grew. People felt abandoned, angry, powerless. And when people feel powerless, they look for someone to blame. Into that anger stepped the Brexit campaign. With slogans like "Take Back Control," the campaign promised revival. A fresh start. Liberation from EU bureaucracy. It sold a dream, one where the UK was sovereign, powerful, unshackled. But dreams lie. Because Brexit didn't fix the economy, it fractured it further. Overnight, the pound plunged. Investors pulled out. Trade barriers rose. The UK lost frictionless trade with its biggest partner, the EU. Small businesses suffered first, then exporters, then farmers, then the public. Prices went up, shelves went empty, international firms left, and as reality bit, the same politicians who sold the lie offered no apology, no plan, just more blame. The dirty truth is this. Brexit was less about freedom and more about distraction. It told the poor their problem was Brussels, not Westminster, that immigrants were to blame, not inequality, that sovereignty meant prosperity, not poverty. All while the economy buckled further under the weight of bad choices, and just when it couldn't get worse, it did. A pandemic. Then came 2020, a new decade. A new crisis. COVID-19 didn't care about borders or slogans. It didn't care about red buses or blue passports. It hit the world hard. And it hit the UK harder than most. The NHS, already underfunded from a decade of austerity, was forced to carry the weight of an unprecedented public health disaster. Hospitals overflowed. Nurses worked through exhaustion. Doctors reused PPE. Families said goodbye through screens. Meanwhile, the government scrambled, not to lead, but to control the narrative already. From the start, there were warning signs, delays in lockdowns, confusion over rules, changing messages. One day you could visit your grandmother, the next you couldn't go outside. One day, masks were pointless, the next they were essential. And while millions followed the rules, isolating, sacrificing, burying loved ones in silence, those in power broke them. Parties at Downing Street, wine, cheese, and laughter, while the rest of the nation mourned. It wasn't just incompetence, it was cruelty, a betrayal of trust. Billions were spent on PPE contracts handed to friends and donors, many of them with zero experience in healthcare. Some contracts failed to deliver anything, others delivered unusable equipment. But the money, gone, vanished into the hands of the already wealthy. Track and trace, a £37 billion system, didn't even work properly. It became a symbol of modern British governance, expensive, overhyped, and ultimately useless. And while corruption flourished, real people suffered. Small businesses collapsed, the arts withered, tourism tanked, restaurants shuttered, tens of thousands died, millions lost work. Mental health worsened, isolation grew, children fell behind, food banks surged. And when hope flickered, when vaccines arrived, even then there was division, confusion, delay. Then, as the dust began to settle, came a new disaster. But this time, man-made. The Liz Truss government. In just 45 days, a prime minister who had promised to slash taxes and supercharge growth instead tanked the UK economy. Her mini-budget was a time bomb, cutting taxes without funding, triggering panic in the markets. The pound fell. Pension funds wobbled. The Bank of England had to step in to prevent financial collapse. Mortgage rates surged. Rent prices climbed. Families already crushed by inflation were now gasping for breath. And as quickly as she came, Truss was gone. The shortest-serving PM in history, leaving behind a crater where confidence once stood. But the damage wasn't hers alone. It was systemic. For over a decade, public services had been worn thin. One crisis, a pandemic, exposed every weakness. The second, political instability, it made them worse. And through it all, the public left to pick up the pieces. The cost of living crisis didn't just arrive, it exploded. Energy bills tripled, fuel costs surged, supermarket basics became luxuries, heating became a question of survival. And across the UK, one question echoed louder than ever. How did we let this happen? So after the collapse of industry, after the crash of 2008, after the austerity decade, after Brexit, and after a global pandemic, what's left of the UK economy? Not much. What remains is a fragile shell, a nation built not on productivity or innovation, but on consumption, speculation, and borrowed time. The UK's economy is now heavily service-based, but many of those services are low-wage, unstable, and uninspiring. Gig work, call centers, hospitality, jobs that don't build a future, They just barely keep the present alive. Real wages have stagnated for over a decade. In 2023, average wages adjusted for inflation were lower than they were in 2008. Think about that. 15 years of work, and people are worse off. Meanwhile, the cost of living has exploded. Housing is unaffordable. Rent swallows half of many workers' pay. Mortgages are out of reach. A generation of young people has been priced out of the future, forced to rent overpriced flats from landlords who profit from misery. The UK's housing crisis isn't an accident. It's a business model. Banks make billions from mortgage debt. Landlords are subsidized by housing benefits. Developers hoard land. And instead of building affordable homes, councils sell land to luxury high-rises that stand half empty. Education is no better. Universities are bloated with admin, yet underfunded where it counts. Students leave with £50,000 plus in debt. And many graduate into jobs that don't require degrees at all. Healthcare. The NHS is in permanent crisis mode, not because of immigrants, not because of staff laziness, but because it's being slowly dismantled. Privatized by stealth, piece by piece. A contract here, a tender there. Until one day, you'll need a credit card, not an NHS number. And under all this pressure, people break. Debt is skyrocketing. Credit card defaults are rising. Food banks can't keep up. Over 1 million people used a food bank in 2023. That's not a safety net. That's a failure. And in this desperation, something else is rising. Survival sex work. According to the English Collective of Prostitutes, calls for help from women considering sex work doubled during the cost of living crisis. 1 in 5 young homeless women have exchanged sex just for a place to sleep. The National Union of Students found over 7% of students had engaged in sex work to pay for food, rent, or bills, not by choice, by desperation. Because when a country forces its citizens to trade dignity for dinner, that's not just a broken economy. That's a broken morality. Yet what does the government do? It blames refugees. It blames rail workers. It blames nurses. Anyone but the billionaires, anyone but themselves. And what does the media do? It parrots the same lines. It distracts. It divides. It tells the working class to punch down, not up. Meanwhile, the wealth gap grows wider. The rich hide their money in tax havens. They own second homes while others sleep rough. They profit from crisis. They invest in misery because the system works for them. For everyone else, it's a trap. Britain still tells itself stories that it's a world leader, a global influencer, a bastion of democracy and progress, a proud nation punching above its weight. But the story doesn't match the reality. Nuclear submarines patrol foreign waters while children in Hull go to school without breakfast. The government spends billions on defense, while pensioners die in cold flats. Royal weddings cost millions. Meanwhile, thousands queue at food banks. The disconnect isn't just economic. It's psychological. There's a myth that Britain still leads, that it's still at the center of things, but it isn't, and hasn't been for decades. Once a manufacturing powerhouse, now it imports most of what it consumes. Once the heart of global finance, now overshadowed by New York, by Hong Kong, by Singapore. Once the empire, where the sun never set, now a nation whose power has faded into memory. Yet the nostalgia machine keeps turning. Politicians wrap themselves in Union Jacks. They talk of blitz spirit, Churchillian grit, bulldog determination. The media plays along, flags in classrooms, patriotic songs, red arrows in the sky. But you can't eat nostalgia. You can't heat your home with pride. And you can't build the future by staring at the past. While other nations invest in green energy, digital infrastructure, public transit, education, Britain reminisces. It clings to an imagined greatness instead of facing the uncomfortable present. There's no industrial policy, no serious climate plan, no vision beyond the next headline. And yet, the illusion remains. Because it's easier to remember victories than admit defeat. Easier to blame outsiders than look inward. Easier to wave flags than to raise questions, but denial doesn't fix economies. It doesn't lift children out of poverty. It doesn't pay rent. It doesn't stop NHS waiting lists from growing. It doesn't make your pay go further. The only thing denial does is delay the reckoning. And every year, the reckoning gets closer. So here we are, after centuries of empire, decades of austerity, years of chaos, we are left with a country in decline. Not just economically, but morally, culturally, spiritually. Because collapse isn't always loud, it isn't always bombs and barricades. Sometimes it's quiet, a slow drift, 1,000 cuts. An entire society that no longer believes in itself. Once the UK stood for something. It had a vision, even if flawed. A promise of stability, of pride, of leadership. But what does it stand for now? Corruption, division, delusion. Look around. There are more food banks than McDonald's, more people in poverty than ever before, children growing up with no idea what a secure future looks like, families juggling 3 jobs and still not making it. Public services are crumbling, wages have flatlined, energy costs have tripled, teachers are leaving, doctors are quitting, trains don't run, roads don't get fixed, everything is broken, everything is fraying. And the ones who broke it, they're still in charge, still smiling, still pretending. But here's the part they don't want you to hear. Britain hasn't just fallen behind, it has fallen. The headlines just haven't caught up yet. We are not approaching collapse. We are living through it right now, right here. This is what systemic failure looks like when it's normalized, when it's accepted, when it's quietly managed with just enough distraction to keep people tired, scared, and compliant. The dirty truth, the fall isn't coming. The fall is already here.
This was The Dirty Tales. If you thought that was eye-opening, trust me, there's a lot more they don't want you to know. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay ahead of the lies. This is just the beginning. Stay awake and ask the questions they don't want you to.